Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Elise Adler, Director of Events for Parnassus Books, and we are absolutely thrilled to share tonight's event featuring poet, essayist, and fiction writer and incredibly creative person, Destiny Birdsong. She is with us to launch her new book of fiction, Nobody's Magic. And remember that you can buy signed copies of Nobody's Magic from Parnassus Books. And we're going to go ahead and put the link to do that in the comments and the chat. Destiny tonight has agreed to take questions, so you can ask them in those same places. And please go ahead and ask questions, and she'll do her best to answer those throughout the course of the evening. And tonight we are especially thrilled because Destiny is in conversation with her friend and fellow creative, one of the most creative people you'll ever meet, is Stephanie Pruitt Gaines. So I am absolutely pleased and honored to turn it over to Destiny and Stephanie.
Destiny Birdsong. I'm having a conversation with you tonight. I'm really excited.
No, I think this is the perfect way to launch this book. I feel like where we met, how we met as fellow workshoppers in our MFA program, and being old friends. And like this book is so much about that, about friendship, about found family, about making one's way through the world. And I feel like this is the perfect way to usher this book into the world. So I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. Same here. Well, I definitely want to talk about seasons in life, friendships, how time affects all of that, because that so connects with the themes of the book. But first, happy Pub Day. Can you show us Nobody's Magic?
I can. So she's right here. Super beautiful. I was so lucky to have like two different covers. So we had one cover, and the powers that be at the press thought it would be really important to have a person on the cover. And it wasn't a thing I'd necessarily thought about, but I was like, okay, I'm open. And then one day in my inbox, I get this. Like,
how did you react? What were your thoughts when you saw the cover art?
Right. Yeah. She's so beautiful. And I hope that the beauty of the book can live up to the cover.
Yeah. Would 8 or 9 or 10-year-old Destiny have seen her as beautiful? No. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, sometimes hell is other people. I grew up in like a really loving family. One of my friends pointed out recently, so my nickname, no one who did not know me at the age of 5 can use it, but my nickname is Honey Bunny. And my uncles named me that because of my hair color. And so I was talking to one of my friends recently, and he was like, "Oh my God, like just the way they named you, like they love you." and so I did grow up in a family that was really loving and supportive, and that was necessary because the outside world is not great when you look physically different from everyone else. And so sometimes I look back at like childhood photos and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I was such a cutie." I had these big cheeks and the glasses. There were always glasses. And but I often felt monstrous, so I don't, even until like I started really writing honestly about myself, I did not see the possibility of my writing characters with albinism at all. Like it wasn't even a thing. It may have only been in the past, like I would say 7 or 8 years. Yeah.
And so let's get into that. So the 3 characters we're introduced to in Nobody's Magic, it would probably be tempting for a lot of people to say, oh, this is autobiographical. But we meet Suzette, Maple, and Agnes. Three women from 20 to sounds like probably maybe early 30s, mid 30s,
Mid-30s, yeah.
who
Okay.
all have connections to Shreveport, Louisiana, two still living there, one who's living in Nashville, Tennessee. All three of them are women with albinism. And so we immediately, understand that's part of the landscape we're dealing with. But all three of them are very unique and distinct characters who I think it would be a fatal flaw to assume are versions of you as the author. And I know, like with poetry, we'll talk about the speaker of the poem, not
Mhm.
assuming that it's autobiographical. But how do you navigate your relationship with these three characters?
I think part of that navigation is something I've been thinking a lot about recently, because I feel like as writers, we often talk about craft, and craft is really important, right? Like, and in fiction, like, voice is important, and there are all these sort of elements and plot structure and, different scenes and dialogue. But lately, I've been thinking a lot about instinct, and it's something that is cultivated. I have trouble describing what it is, but sometimes for me it feels like a little pull in one direction, and that actually happened here. I think that this is a good example of what the characters ended up teaching me about themselves. For Maple's story, Bottled Water, I had decided, that I was going to write a story where the mother and daughter had a healthy relationship. They were friends, they got along, they, like, because I write about complex mother-daughter dynamics. I wrote my dissertation about it. Like in every genre I write in, I have written about that subject. And so I said, I'm gonna do something different this time. This time they're gonna be friends, they're gonna have fun together. And so I wrote the first scene of Bottled Water. And like I had my writing time. I wrote for a couple of hours. I got up, I cooked dinner, and I can see this moment in my mind. I was looking down in the skillet. I was frying something. I don't know what it was,
Okay,
but
working it out in the kitchen. Yep.
you know, doing my thing. And I heard a voice say, "The mother is supposed to be dead." And I was like, "What?" My
Oh,
character who's supposed to like have this great relationship with her mother, that mother is supposed to be dead. But I said to myself, okay, so tomorrow when I have my writing time, I will write as if the mother is dead.
hmm.
And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, I'm going back to my original plan.
Mhm.
And yeah, and so I sat down that next day and started writing, and it took off. I mean, like it just it and in that sense, I had things in mind when I created the characters, but I was also willing to listen to those small voices that were like, this should be this way, this should be that, and just sort of following it and sort of seeing where it took me. Because I didn't, I was talking about this earlier today, but I like to write books when no one's asking for them, like no one's paying attention
Mhm.
to them. Yeah. So I was writing this book shortly before and immediately after negotiations got picked up. So nobody was like, where's your next book? Like
Yeah.
it was me and my writing time and my pages and my Zoom sessions with my friends, and that's what it was. Like and not having that pressure, I think, and not having someone expecting something from me allowed me to follow those little tugs that were saying different things.
Sounds like
Yeah, and I think
a very honest way to create.
yeah. And I think it allows the characters to not be you. Right? Yeah,
Right, right.
yeah.
And yeah, we're there. We're always there in our writing, and things are happening under the surface that sometimes we are not even aware of, but we're not necessarily overtly there. But it makes me
Mhm,
think a lot about, I mean, the structure of this novel being a triptych novel instead
mhm.
of three separate novellas or, doing shorter stories or whatnot. Talk to me about why it was important to have these three stories together, but not overtly tied together, although they're clearly in such intimate relationship with one another. But just talk about what is a triptych novel and why does it work for this story, these stories?
Well, I think one of the reasons it works especially well for these stories is that for many years, it hasn't happened recently. And I hope it's just because there's just like wider public awareness about people with albinism. But Oh my gosh. Like if I had $1 for every time someone came up to me here, in this city and be like, are you related to such and such? And it would just be another person with albinism. Like, I mean, the person could have been an only child. Like they have no clue. They just know that like these two people look alike. I'm gonna assume they're related.
They must know one another.
Um, yeah, yeah. And so, it wasn't necessarily a thing I was thinking about when I was writing the stories. These all started off as short stories, right? So they started off as short stories. I am a long-winded writer. I am aware of that. They all came out very long. But then as my first readers were reading them, they were like, oh, these could be longer. Like what happens after, like what happens to Suzette after this point? And so I was like, oh, well, let me see if I can come up with something. And so they turned into novellas, but as they were becoming the parts of the triptych, it was clear to me that they were talking to each other, right? So there are these common themes in their lives, even though they don't know each other. And I'm glad that they don't know each other because it does kind of dispel that myth that I was often having to reckon with, that I was somehow I automatically knew this other person I'd never met. And yeah, and even though Shreveport is it's a good sized city. It's not a large city, but it is possible for them to have lived there. And I love it that there are these little like links between the stories. So like, and it's one thing that my editor kind of pointed out in a couple of them and like asked me to do for all of them, but like there are references to each other in the stories. I think Suzette says something, makes a reference to Agnes. And when Agnes is driving back into this, she sees something that reminds her of Suzette. I don't want to give away the plot, but
Right,
yes,
right. Very subtle.
Agnes has a little sort of like intersecting moment with Suzette's life. And so, yeah, I love that. And I love that they're talking to each other across the pages without actually like talking to each other.
Right.
But that is often, sometimes, yeah, when we have a shared subjectivity that our lives do have these, these connections and themes. But I wanted them to be, I wanted them to sort of map out those journeys on their own. And
Yeah.
yeah.
It made me think of there's a really good TED talk that went viral, I'm sure. The Danger of a Single Story, Chimamanda Adichie, and it's so critical to recognize that there are nuances to everyone's story. And oftentimes, we read novel. A lot of people who love to read, we read novels to experience pieces of people's lives who we might not otherwise, with whom we might not otherwise connect, visit places we haven't been to. And there can be a sort of tokenism at times when we read one novel or one story about a person with albinism or a person from this place. And we think, oh, that's everyone. We generalize that. So it was so powerful to have the three very distinct stories and characters, but showing kind of tangents of these single connections. What do we need to know about Shreveport? If I've never been, what is a flavor that I need to understand to feel kind of the stories here?
First of all, the food is amazing.
Okay.
You said flavor. I thought about my mama's food.
Okay, so
The
when we
food is,
go on our next road trip, because we've got a few, where are we going to eat in Shreveport? What are we going to have?
seafood.
Okay.
Yeah. That's how, I mean, you get it here, but Tennessee's landlocked and,
Yeah.
yeah, you get a wide range of variety.
Yeah.
A wide range of quality of seafood here. But yeah, seafood, Orlando's, also lots of people like to eat on the boats because there are river boats there. There's gambling because there's a waterway.
Yeah.
The Red River separates Shreveport and Bossier, which are kind of like twin cities, like Minneapolis, St. Paul, just sort of they're just on opposite sides of the river. So people like to go to the boat to eat. Or the boardwalk, which is also on the river. There are lots of really cool places there. I like to eat the food my family makes, and and they take my requests. So,
Like, oh, Jeffrey's
so
coming home. We know she wants
yes.
this. Yeah.
Yes. But I think in a larger sense, like it's such an interesting city, and I don't know that I certainly didn't know that when I was growing up because I hadn't been to a lot of other cities. But It is very much a Louisiana city, you know, it is not Southern Louisiana where you have sort of like people speaking French or like plaques in French and things like that. You have some of that there. And you get like Mardi Gras celebrations and all of that stuff, but you also get like it is also a deep Southern city, right? It's in the deep South. So you have that culture, and then it's also very close to Texas, and so you have like elements of like the West, you know, like it's just a really interesting place. I think like I I am almost certain that you know I don't know that I could have been an artist if I didn't live there. And
Oh,
also if
tell
I
me about
didn't,
that.
yeah, if I did, I mean, I think there's just so much, you know, and sometimes it was just out of necessity, you know, it's just like there wasn't a whole lot to do. And so I read a lot. But also I grew up around interesting people, you know, like my mom's siblings and my cousins. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, but I grew up around people who were artists, and they were artists in all kinds of ways, and they would use things like my uncle makes like jams and jellies, and there are crabapple trees in Shreveport, so he picks the crab apples. Crabapple is my favorite of his jelly. So whenever I come, he always saves the crab apple so I can bring it home. It tastes like apple, but it's tart. You know, it's like
Ah,
and so they sort of use the world around them. You know, I had
mhm.
my uncle's father-in-law was like a great fisherman and like a great cook. So like he would like go and catch fish on Cross Lake and then like come home and
Mhm.
like fillet them, and we would have fish fries. So there's like, I mean, and my mom would like make shirts and bows, and I have uncles who can play instruments kind of without any like musical training, and people who grow things. I have a cousin who makes soap. I grew up around people who make things and who make use of the world around them. And so and it feels to me like it's that kind of city. I was often in contact with people who were incredibly creative and you know who were sort of steeped in all of these different cultures, Louisiana and the South and a little bit of the West, and like and so yeah, I
Yeah.
mean it really is an interesting city for me
That's
anyway.
so a few things I pick up on. I mean, you talk about people who are making things, and in a slightly different but related way, all three of your characters are making, constantly making and remaking in this novel. A lot they're trying to make their lives, make something of what has in some ways been handed to them. Maybe they're
Mhm.
grappling with control, what's in their realm of control and what isn't, and they're making and refashioning. I mean, Suzette, a young woman who has been in many ways probably overprotected by her parents, especially her father, after a really an intense and scary, threatening situation when she was young. And so now she's been
Mhm.
protected where even, the possibility of going to college. No, baby, you don't need college. You don't need school, because that's a fear that her father has. And then you have Maple, who, is very, very close to her mother. Some people would call it an unconventional relationship, but
Yes.
undoubtedly loving her mother as a sex worker who has raised her to be extremely sex positive. I love that you talk about the sex talk for Maple when she turned 12 was
Mhm.
about getting her a pocket rocket. It wasn't that, you
Yes.
know, it wasn't the typical talk that a lot of us probably experience, but
Yeah.
it was, about owning your body and pleasure and
Mhm.
safety and that type of thing. And when her mother tragically dies, Maple is grappling with grief and figuring out how to make and fashion a life out of what feels tattered. And then Agnes is
Mhm.
also really working to make a life, and she has all of these dots that are respectable and, all of these degrees and skills and this whole range of experience, but finds herself kind of underemployed and
Mhm.
over prepared, some might say, and also grappling with kind of her expectations of life and how she's making it. So the idea of artistry, I feel like, is woven quietly throughout this novel, with the three
Mhm.
women wanting to make a work of art out of their lives that maybe haven't
Mhm.
gone the way they've intended. I don't know, talk to me some about like disappointments and refreshing and starting over, because in different ways I think your three characters are working through that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I also love the idea that they're all kind of like making things. Like someone quoted to me recently, one thing that Maple's mother says to her, which is like, you don't find love, you make love, right?
Yeah.
You sort of have to like, you put it, you piece together what you can, and
Yeah.
you live with that and you find joy in that. And then when you make another thing, which I think is so much of Maple's story, is just like the loss of really the person who's like the love of her life, and having to sort of like figure out what her life looks like in the absence of that person.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like I've certainly had my share of like loss of people, and sometimes it's not like death, it's just like the relationship ends. Like I can't be around this person anymore, and that is for the best for both of us. And so I am often thinking about that, like what it means to be really emotionally tied to someone or something, or sometimes a place. Like I think that in Suzette's story, like Suzette, I think there's a point in Suzette's life where she's very comfortable where she is. And when she starts to realize that that's not the only place she wants to be, right? Like the navigation of what that means gets really complicated. And there's also like grief there, and the way her relationship with her best friend starts to change. I love, no spoilers, but I love the scene where they're in the restaurant and the guy says to her, like, he tells her to smile. He says, "You look like you lost your best friend." And in a
She
sense,
has
like
in some
yeah,
way.
yeah, and the way their relationship changes, like she does. And I think just as a person who's had to survive those kinds of disappointments, I'm always really interested in like what you do with that. Like what do you do with the story that doesn't turn out the way you had in mind, right? Yeah. What do you do when you have to sort of build love out of the ashes of what you thought was going to last forever, and you had no reason to believe it would be any different? I don't know. I am, that is one of my like writer's obsessions,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. What do you do? What do you do in
Good
the
question.
aftermath?
I
Yeah.
mean, I'm thinking both about the novel and just you personally and our friendship and how,
Mhm.
over the years, there were some times where we were seeing each other almost every day. And, with
Mhm.
classes on campus, that type of thing. Both Cave Canem fellows. We, took
Mhm.
some road trips over summers and that.
Yes.
And then over like the last several years, I don't know that I've seen you in person at all. And it was still like
Mhm.
this amazing thing when you called and was like, "Hey, I have this event. I would love to be in conversation with you." And it was like not missing a beat, but also knowing, of course, we've missed many beats in one another's
Mhm.
lives. But there's
Mhm.
something interesting that I noticed in kind of Suzette's friendships that shift, and then our friendship and relationship that has shifted, but still there. And it's
Yeah.
like I saw a meme the other day talking about adult friendships and saying an adult friendship is talking to your friend on the phone saying, "Hey, let me call you call you right back," and you call back a month later and it's just fine, like nobody cares. So how do like in these friendships and intimate relationships, how does time and like personal growth factor into how the characters are developing and as individuals and kind of what in your life were you able to use as research for that maybe?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I think for the characters, again, I feel like, no matter what a person looks like on the outside, chances are that they're moving forward in some way, right? I think about that specifically when I think about Suzette. It seems like Suzette watches television and buys clothes. um, um,
I can
but
relate.
I think, yeah, but I think that her just natural development as a human being starts to sort of push up against what has been comfortable. And I think that that often happens with a lot of us, right? And so sometimes it means that we do different things, we move in different circles, like people, um And I say this with a lot of love and humility, but I think people sort of think about my having two books as like this sort of like phenomenal thing. And it's sort of like it happens overnight and it looks really fast. But I think part of the ways that my life has changed, even like in the years that we have not had as much contact, is that I got really serious about what I wanted to do. And so much of my life started to sort of shift and sort of become, you know, this writer's life, which for me, like, necessitates seclusion. I can't even write in coffee shops. I do not do that. I am not that person. I need complete silence. I need lots of warmth. Sometimes that's a heating pad. Sometimes that's like a blanket. Like I have my little blanket here.
Literal warmth. Yeah.
As I'm talking to you, yeah, I have to feel safe. I have to be warm. I have to feel safe. I have to be in a space that feels beautiful to me, you know, that is sometimes filled with things that are whose sentimental value is only visible to me. And that takes time and energy. And sometimes it pulls me away from people and things that I love. You know, my friendships have evolved over the years. You know, people that I thought would be in my life forever are not here anymore. And it's heartbreaking. But I also deeply understand that I am and I should always be evolving. And the people who are meant to stay, you know, like they'll be back. They might step out, you know, but they'll come back, you know, or like we might not see each other as often, but when we come back into contact, it's very real and it's very present, and we're able to accept each other for the evolving selves we've become, for the work that we've been doing in that time away. And so, yeah, I do think there's a lot of that in the book, you know, like Maple evolves. I think if Maple were to see her mom again, you know, it would be an interesting, because she changes. I mean, out of necessity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I totally see that. I mean, and speaking of evolving, you know, I imagine if someone met you in different times over the last, 10, 15, 20 years, they would say, oh, Destiny is a poet. Oh, Destiny is an essayist. Oh, Destiny is an educator. Oh, Destiny is because, and I know you in all of I know you professionally in all of those ways. And I'm not saying any of those single entities, define who you are. But how do you describe yourself professionally right now? Are you a writer? Are you a poet? Are you a novelist, an author, all of the above? What do you say?
Yeah, I think the sort of the very quick and simplest answer is that I'm a writer. You know, I think if it's pen to paper, I'll do it again. I think that is in part ancestral. My great grandmother used to. I have this really distinct memory of my great grandmother talking. I was eavesdropping on the phone. You know, back in the day, you could eavesdrop. You know, on the house phone. You just held a little. You held it down till you got the phone up, and then you
And then
released.
gently. That's something we've
This
lost. We've lost that with cell phones.
as a nosy person, it is a loss. So I have this distinct memory of being, I don't think I could have been older than maybe 6 or 7. And I was eavesdropping on the phone with my mom and one of my mom's friends and my great grandmother. And my great grandmother could just like write church speeches, just write speeches like extemporaneously. And she was dictating a speech to my mom's friend who had a speech she had to give and needed some help. So yeah, but you know, if it's words that I understand the meanings of and I feel like I need to put them on paper, I will put them on paper. In any genre. I did not think, when we were in our MFA program, I thought I would be a poet and maybe I would write literary criticism because I was also in the PhD program, and so I was being trained to do that. But I have come to understand myself as someone who can do that and who is willing to do it and just try new things. I wasn't trained to write fiction in my MFA program, but I think that my family's history of storytelling, I think my relationships with my friends, which are often like we're often talking to each other, so I love writing dialogue. I think my long-standing love of books and just love of like hearing people talk, write, sing about life. I think all of those things, I was always interested in those things, even when I wasn't sure what kind of art I would be making. But over the years, I've become very open to just writing whatever. And then sometimes sometimes I need low stakes stuff, so I'll make jewelry or like,
Mhm. I love
get
it.
weird, get on weird decorating bents for the house and
There you go.
like, yeah, like
I'm
redo the couch
glad.
covers or something. So.
Oh, what colors? What's your upholstery color these days?
Right now, the seat cushions are a nice red. The back
Okay.
pillows are bright yellow. The accent pillows are blue, purple,
Oh, you got color,
orange.
girl.
Yes,
Okay, I
I
feel you.
love bright colors. They make me so happy. I read
I love it.
maybe it was Mary Nana Anna Donqua's
Hmm.
memoir. I think it's called Willow Weep for Me, and it's about her journey through depression. And like I also struggle with depression.
Yeah.
And I think in one story, she painted one of her walls in her apartment like this really bright color because she's like seeing that color brings me joy. And I remember
Yeah.
reading that at like a really low point in my life, and I remember buying like a really brightly colored like comforter set. And I
Mm.
was like, oh, looking at this like makes me happy. And so like I slowly sort of started to build like an environment where
Yeah.
there's lots of color and patterns and fibers. It makes me so
Well,
happy. It's also why I love my book. Like my book
the
matches my
colors.
house.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, it also makes me think of Suzette in the first triptych and, the color in her hair and her use of
Mhm.
makeup and clothes and creative, colorful self-expression and what that does for her. The other thing you mentioned was your love of dialogue and Destiny, your skill and craft came yelling through in the way that you handle dialogue and the way that you wove vernacular and speak. I heard the characters in my mind as I was reading. And I was also interested. I imagine at some point there will be conversations about African American vernacular English and its use in this novel. Of course, we'll have that. But it was so important for each of the three sections, each of the three kind of stories to have such a different voice and tone that you deftly handled. I mean, the first two are in first person, the last one
Mhm.
is in third person, but they are also just entirely different, voices, tones, dictions, their vocabulary. It made me imagine that I'll ask this. So, if the three different main characters were to go grocery shopping, what toothpaste would each of them buy? And
Well,
I'm asking,
I'm a Crest fan myself. I feel like
okay,
Agnes would probably get Crest because it's a recognizable name brand. I think Maple just would get what's on sale. I don't think Maple will care. I think Suzette might be like, what other celebrities use?
I see
Right?
that.
She might be like ordering it from some like special site or something. But yeah, voice was really important. Voice was really important for me in terms of like I did want them to be very different in that regard, and I think of Suzette as sort of growing up around her parents, and so she has a lot of received language. And then Maple has sort of lived in these different spaces. She's been to college, but she's also like her mom's kid, so she's also been in like strip clubs. Like
Yeah.
she's sort of been around, and so her linguistic range is like speaks to that, to the many lives that she's lived both with her mother and also on her own. And Agnes, I wanted Agnes to be like an educated fool. So like there's this sort of very like distinguished diction in Agnes's story, but Agnes is just like Agnes is Agnes, I guess, for lack of a better word. But I wanted it to be in like stark contrast to like the disaster of her life. And that she sort of the narration, although it's not first person in her story, really is reflective of how she wants you to see her. But you're also seeing her do these things, Yeah. So there's this lovely contradiction. I really wanted that to be the case for her story. So.
So let's pause a second and talk about this because the strong black woman has become a moniker. I would call it a slur almost, and how troubling and problematic it can be. But from the outside, we see Agnes has a lot going on. I mean, she is highly, highly educated, multiple degrees. She is taught at, a well-respected university, but she is really she's working through she's struggling to kind of find her place and be honest about what she truly wants and what she's supposed to want, according to the world standards and whatnot. How do you talk to me about Agnes? Who is she, and how how are you imagining her life right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So Agnes was actually the first character that I started on.
And she's the last one in
Yeah,
the book.
and the last one in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did not like Agnes when Agnes first appeared. And I think part of why she comes later in the books, I'm like, I gotta earn my readers' respect because Agnes is a lot. If you start with Agnes, you might not want to hear nothing else I have to say.
That's
Um,
smart.
I wrote her at a time where I also sort of felt some of her desperation. And it's like, I think the question I was asking myself when I started writing her part of the novel is what would happen if in this particular moment of desperation, a woman, a Black woman, me, anybody, succumbed to their sort of most um, their sort of most visceral, most sort of, reactive impulses, right?
Because she has a
And
snapped moment, like, not to give away the plot to people, but she
yeah,
has a full on, snapped and did exactly
she
what her emotions were telling her.
yeah. What happened if you just leaned into that impulse and you let it happen? Agnes is Agnes is what happens when you do that.
Yeah.
And so that's how she was made, and I struggled to like her because I think it's just like she's a jerk, and she's good reason to be like she has really deep trauma. She really does.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to shy away from that either. But it doesn't necessarily justify any of the things she does or the way she treats people, and so that's how she was born. Just sort
Yeah.
of wondering, what if?
Well, I see all three women dealing with trauma, and a lot of it,
Mhm.
some of them are very specific situations, but a lot of it seems to be rooted in the difference between being looked at and being seen.
Yep,
And these are women who have
absolutely.
been looked at all their
Mhm.
lives, objectified, pointed at, that type of thing. But, and,
Mhm.
have they been seen, fully
Yeah.
seen and accepted for who they are? And they're
Mhm.
longing for that in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is the thing that so first I think if I had to pick a favorite character who was not any of the main characters, it would absolutely be Donnie. And I think that like he sees her. Like he see like I love the moment when they're like outside her father's like work shed at home and she's
Mhm.
like, why are you so mean to me? And he's like, I treat you like you treat everybody else.
Mm.
Like he has her number, and so he sees her in some really important ways. And I think that once she starts to sort of get a sense of that, I think that's also part of the disruption of her world, right? That she has finally found someone who sees her, and she starts to kind of like subconsciously compare that to the life she's been living with her parents, and in some cases with her best friend, because again, no spoilers, but there's some stuff that has not been said between them either.
Right.
Yeah,
That's,
yeah,
yeah.
and
Silence, what's said and what isn't, is also a
mhm.
major theme here. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think I just me as an individual, like I think that is when I feel my safest is when I feel seen by the people around me, and not only seen but like and I borrowed this from Danica Kelly, who you also know. We took the road trip together.
Yeah.
It's so wild. I was just working on a poem that had some lines that referred to that trip, like because I
Oh,
remember like watching The Color Purple on television in the back of the van. The van
yes.
was fancy.
I remember
um,
that.
um,
Oh
but
man.
um, but yeah, but not only being seen, but something Danica pointed out when we had a conversation over this past summer, but like being considered. Like so, like not just I think that Suzette's parents in some ways do see her, but they don't always consider her. right? What is actually best for her.
Yeah.
And quiet as is kept, there are a couple other parents and other stories that also sort of struggle with that. And yeah, I think just as a person, I'm interested in those kinds of conversations wherever I can have them. And so if they happen in the work, like, yeah, absolutely, I'm interested in that, especially when we're talking about subjectivity that is as specific as albinism, right? That there are lots of ways of being viewed, because your difference is sort of like on your skin all the time, and actually being seen. Like I see you, not that I can see past that, because that's kind of the same thing that happens when people are like, I don't see color. Like, color's a real thing. Color is important. But to see that, and I think Donnie is one of the characters that really gets that early on. Yeah, and I love him. I have a crush on him, but that's another conversation.
Donnie was a really exciting character to me, because there is this, when someone has experienced something dangerous, possibly traumatic, those who love them have this impulse to protect them. And there are a few ways to do it. Like, there's a difference between something that's secret and sacred, like just secretive, hiding it, pulling it away, and sacred is protected. And in some ways, she had been overly kind of made into a secret of the world, and that, all kind of issues. But I'll tell you another thing I really love, because I know we're getting close to time, is that there are no footnotes in this novel. And this novel is dealing with some very specific, physical manifestations, cultural things, historical references, and spaces that if you haven't occupied, you might not immediately identify. And I'm thinking back, honestly, to times that we were in poetry workshop together writing, and you would read a poem out loud, or I might read a poem out loud, and the other would snicker because we heard something and totally recognized it, and maybe other people in the workshop didn't. And I, in the novel, you mentioned blue magic, and I immediately smelled the hair grease.
Yes.
There's a moment where you mentioned, oh, they're the Jack and Jill people, and I had a picture of who they were. These specific cultural references that are home. It's also like the difference between home speak and, school speak. And you have that woven throughout these specific kind of cultural moments that some audiences might want or need footnotes for. But what I appreciate is that you let these worlds stand on their own, and you create them in such a way that the reader trusts and knows every line, every detail is meant to be there. And it invites you to go into the world and learn more about it. If there was something I didn't know about albinism, including like eye movements that are mentioned in the novel several times, I immediately wanted to know and see it. So I would immediately, look that up and read. And so it opened my world in all of these ways. How did you, I know we have to close out, but how did you get to a point where you would trust the reader enough to enter this world without over explaining yourself or the characters, and allowing the readers to meet you there and really find beautiful spaces? How do you do that?
Yeah, thank you for that. I do think that I don't love being talked to as I read, right? I think there are spaces where that's appropriate, like from reading like self-help or something, right? Like, yeah, you're talking to me because I'm coming to you for advice about how to live my life. But I think in the art of storytelling, and particularly in spaces like in Black communities where we use AAVE, it's like nobody stops and says like, oh, well, that means. And so and so those characters wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do that if they were sitting across from you in a room and talking to you. And so I wanted to preserve that sense of storytelling, and I think, I just think that there's Google, there are all these different ways that you can, I have to Google stuff when I read, there are words I don't know the meanings of, there's all kinds of stuff that happen. And I'm like, let me figure out what it is so I can get back into the story and be better informed about it. And I think that if, readers are willing to do that for Shakespeare, then they can do that for me. Yes. That's not hard. So
exactly.
I think that is it. But I am also, my poetry collections have note sections and things like that. I think that the concise nature of poetry sometimes necessitates some unpacking, but I think, but for me, I wanted the storytelling to be as true to the voices as I heard them, you know, as true as possible to those voices as I heard them as I was writing. Because I this probably sounds, you know, a little alarming, but I do think about my characters as real people. They talk, they had, yeah, you know, they talk. I think about them now, like what would they be doing now? And you know, yeah, like, yeah. So I really wanted to preserve them as they came to me. And so yeah. So
I want to make sure you have the last word. So I'm going to ask you kind of in just a moment, a last question of what is your wish for these characters in this book? And I know that can seem like a self kind of or aggrandizing question. I don't mean it in that way. But before, I just want to note that this novel feels very important, timely, but also timeless in the way that you deal with grief, because I think we are going to have a real public reckoning with massive grief that so many people are experiencing it. And the way you deal with grief in this novel is masterful. Also dealing with, you know, abilities and differences, and, you know, whether those are differences we can visibly see or differences in the way people are metabolizing situations due to trauma and whatnot. So there are all these themes that I think are so like of the moment, but much bigger and timeless. And so I'm really excited to have this novel living in the world with both a levity, because there are times I laughed out loud and I heard the conversation and the shenanigans, and then also like a denseness that I was able to really hold close. And then also just some zingers and moments where like, oh, that's what I've been feeling for the last 2 years. And she just said it in 7 words. Like, so there's just all of this happening that I was so excited to live with. And I'm thrilled that readers will be living with it. And I mean, this book has already been, you know, blurbed, or, you know, the New York Times has picked it up. I saw that Good Morning America made it one of their exciting reads, Publishers Weekly. So Destiny, this feels like a big book, but you wrote it as just amazing, gorgeous stories. And it's so beautiful to see that creative process with you. So I'm just sending love and congratulations and excitement for it to live in the world. I'm already imagining who's going to play these characters in the movie or the Netflix film. So, hey, somebody call your producer cousin, because this is a script that they will want to produce. But what's your wish for when you imagine these characters' lives and for this book living in the world? What do you want to see as we close?
Oh gosh, well, first I'm gonna grab that Netflix prophecy out of the air and put it here in my pocketbook. You know, I think, and I said a little bit of this in the acknowledgements, but you know, representation is so important, and it's so important to see yourself. Like, it's important to see myself as a Black person, you know, just in general, this is a Black person, as a Southerner, as a woman, as you know, like there are all these identities that when I see them represented, it does something for me. It makes my life feel a bit more relatable and sometimes meaningful, depending on what those representations are. And so like, that's what I really want, you know, like I want people to read, I want people with albinism and people without albinism to read these triptychs and really just like see people in ways that you might not have been seeing them when they just kind of pass you on the street and you think, oh, wow, that's interesting, right? Like, and the ways that we often fetishize difference forecloses on the possibility of nuance. And so what I wanted, and the reason that I wanted these characters to be so different from one another, was that I wanted to show that there is a range of nuance. I can't tell every story because I haven't lived every experience of every person with albinism. They are so distinct from each other. And, you know, there are things like gender and race and socioeconomic status, and also where you are in the world, you know, like your physical safety, depending on what country you live in and how those cultural views could potentially put you in harm's way. I can't tell all of those stories. But what I'm hoping that these characters do is just like maybe broaden the conversation a little bit, because the representation is still very sparse. And yeah, so that's my wish for them. and yeah, I want people to know that the book exists. If they pick it up, I want them to enjoy it. I want them to tell other people to buy it, that helps. But I really do, I really did just want to tell a story. It's a very Black story. It's a very womanly story, but that also sort of speaks to people who haven't lived these experiences, and maybe sort of offers them a bit of a glimpse of the interior lives of people like Suzette, Maple, and Agnes. So
I love
yeah,
that.
thank
Well,
you.
I am excited to get my signed copy. I will actually be dropping by Parnassus later tomorrow because I heard there will be signed copies available at Parnassus, but I know this book is available worldwide online. But of course, I love the independently owned bookstore. So I'm really thrilled to have had this conversation with you on behalf of Parnassus Books, and happy Pub Day, happy Publication Day. Congratulations and thank you for the gift of this book into the world, because I imagine it on many, many reading lists and just on nightstands, really shifting people's minds and awarenesses. And it's one of those comfort books that also broadens your mind that we need in the world right now. So thank you, Destiny.
Thank you. And oh my goodness, thank you so much for having this conversation. It is everything I thought it would be, which is I was so nervous about asking, but so glad I did. This has been wonderful. And I hope we see each other again soon. Like, it has been way too long, just putting that out there.
We will. Done deal. Well, I know there might have been questions in the chat. I got to tell you, friends who are watching, I apologize if I missed questions. I got so deep into the conversation, but I think we can come in later on some of the live streams and maybe see those questions and answer them. And I know when people pick up this book, I think they will have a lot of their questions answered and so much more. So, Destiny, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. Parnassus, thank you for hosting, and thank you all who joined us tonight. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.